Okay, cool. Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to reach out to you and do this for a while now because, like,
I've felt the same about you, actually.
yeah, I've watched like a lot of your content on like AGP and stuff, and I've always thought you have like a different take than most people. You sort of just have like an interesting approach to it that is different from obviously a lot of like non-self-aware, transitioned trans women who are AGP but are in like denial, and in regards to like how to manage it, and then also different from a lot of like self-aware AGPs who like know about AGP and accept it, but like you still seem to have like different opinions and like I don't know. So yeah, I just think like you sort of like are an independent thinker in this space, and um, so yeah, I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to talking to you about
I,
this.
I was just saying in my intro, like and like I was saying it like bombastically, but I think that psychology, all the places where the human brain and human psychology and human behavior can be understood in a repeatable, like very scientific, structured way, are not useful for us to think about in our day to day lives. But we need psychology for our day to day lives. It's very helpful to us, and we have to abstract it from these very structured things that are so granular and microscopic, and we
Right.
abstract out these big things. And I feel like a lot of these like these frameworks for understanding ourselves, they become like kind of like religions, and people, yeah, like the
Right.
AGP thing included too.
Right.
And I like a lot of these religions. Like I talk about personality disorders and I talk about AGP and stuff, but I don't see them as like a be all end all fact about us. Like it's a way of it's a mode of analysis.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something that's definitely real in regards to how we understand, um, the role of psychological categorization and schemas, and the role like that as a science plays culturally. Because there's this one philosopher I really like, Ian Hacking. He had this concept called looping kinds, where he talks about how like so humans are like have all these categories for describing nature. There's some categories that are like natural kinds that you have a category of like H2O, and the category, you have this category, but like the categorization process doesn't change the nature of like H2O itself. It just it, H2O just remains H2O. But
Well,
with
yeah,
categories about humans, the categories change the humans, so it becomes like a feedback loop, such that the very process of trying to categorize humans
yeah.
changes the thing you're trying to categorize, and so the categories interact with the things they're categorizing. So for
I think
example, like
that's true, but
yeah.
it's not. It's that's a little bit. Um, I think it's worse than that. Like that's absolutely a thing that we've observed. Like the fact of describing something changes how we actually behave. So as
Right.
soon as you just, it's like I think an anecdote that comes to mind is something Zizek said. He said in the past, people used to go to a therapist and say, "I don't know what it is, but it's not my mom." But now everybody goes to the therapist and they say, "I don't know what it is, but it's definitely my mom." And both times you're gonna be wrong, no matter what.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think you're right that a lot of self-aware AGPs, um, sort of like take Blancharddian psychology, and it becomes like this super narrative to explain like everything, and like, and yeah, I don't know, but I think the reason why they do that is because one, there's sort of like a heterodox component to it, insofar as like it's so demonized by the mainstream trans community that the defense of that as like a psychological theory just seems like important, like politically or something. And then I think the second thing is like it just seems to resonate very strongly with people, and there's not really like it's like the only game in town. Like there's no other alternative framework that has as much explanatory power for like understanding, our lives. So like even if it's like, you know, not like perfectly accurate, or there's like exceptions, it's like, there's like the simplicity of the model is so powerful that like, um
Yeah.
it's like until someone comes up with a better schema, it's like, it's like
Well,
the only
the
thing.
accurate schema would be like, to go back to the water thing, like we don't think of water is just H2O, but we don't think about how water functions when you put it into your body, what it does in your digestive system, what it does through like osmosis through all your cells. We don't think about all that. We just think, I need to drink water because I'm thirsty and so I can stay alive. Our actual concept of water really isn't this hyper scientific understanding. It's just kind of a really abstract, vague thing. We just know we need water. So
Right. Right. And the other thing I think people don't realize with like the what Blanchard was doing, when he developed like the two typology is like, he was like responding to like a pattern that he observed in like the real world, but he was also reacting to like decades long literature that was all in regards to like how to like categorize the phenomenon of like male to female transsexualism. And different people had like come up with like multiple different typologies. And so his goal was like, okay, well, this person came up with like an 8 type, or like an 8 part typology. This person has like 5 different types. And so he's like, is it possible to like make the simplest possible model that explains those things? But it's like the question of like whether you should like split the categories into like as fine a grain detail as possible, which can proliferate to like 10 categories or like 15, who knows? I mean, you can get really detailed, or to like lump as much phenomena together into like, the simplest possible and that was like his heuristic that he was going for. So, but it's almost like, you know, if the 10 part typology is like phenomenologically accurate, is it like false, or is it just like, it's sort of like it's almost kind of arbitrary how we slice and dice all this stuff.
I just see it as a mythology.
Yeah.
The same way I see, like, and it's the same way I see personality disorders as a mythology. Like, we're still talking about Narcissa, and that's like narcissism. And we're still talking like a lot of these things come from like old myths and like tales. I'm sure Jordan Peterson would have a field day go or like with that. I'm not like obsessed with the myths themselves. I'm just saying that um I I'm of the school of thought that we should I'm of the school of thought we should lump things in together from the root. So I believe that personality disorders, this is something I talk about a lot, um, because I think I'm fucked up. But I think that personality disorders, cluster B personality disorders, are all the same thing. Um, and this is not just me that thinks this. Like, there are other people that think this. Um, and I think that the way of the DSM diagnosis stuff is flawed, and there's an organization working it's no longer like a lot of mainstream psychology doesn't even support that anymore, but there's a new way that they're working on that is kind of more like building blocks. I don't know all the specific, like, off the top of my head, I don't know
Right.
what these things are called, but I could figure it out.
Yeah.
But there's another way that instead of having like these pyramid or these umbrellas that you put people in if they fit enough of the traits, um, the better way to do it is start from the bottom and take all the traits and then use those as building blocks and then create a structure out of the specific traits themselves rather than taking a pyramid. And
Right.
in that like way of thinking about it, all of cluster B really spawns. It's pretty widely generally accepted that it kind of just comes from childhood trauma with maybe some proclivities in the mix. And I think that pretty much everything stems from your childhood, with as through proclivities. And I think that AGP is one of them. I think every part of your sexuality, I think, is probably like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like interesting you liken psychology to like mythology because like it seems definitely a soft science, but it's still different than pure mythology because there's some degree of empirical observation. There's some degree
Yeah.
of like contact with like real patterns in the world. So take like personality, like the big five or whatever. It's like, that big five comes out of these like cluster analyses. And, suppose, theoretically, like when you do that cluster analysis, like you sort of like through statistical wizardry, you sort of like extract out like a real pattern. And then we can like debate about like whether that cluster, what to call that cluster. But it seems like the fact that there are these like clusters, that seems to be like tracking like some real pattern in like the world. So it's like, but it's also, with like mythology, it's like, mythology can be true as well. And also like
Well, we
our
definitely we try to use science, but when we're doing statistical analysis of human behaviors, it's not the same as testing a chemical, like you were kind of alluding to before. Like the human behavioral body, the body of human behavior, is not a static chemical. It is like it is something you cannot isolate.
right.
So
So what was like your first encounter with like the concept of like AGP? Um
uh just myself.
so just before you even had words for it, you just recognized it as being something that you were grappling with, or
Yeah, I remember being in elementary school and thinking like, oh, wouldn't it be so exciting if like I was forced to go. I remember being in kindergarten and thinking it would be so exciting if I was forced to go to like an all girls school and wear all girls clothes. And I had that thought and that feeling as soon as I realized I had a crush on this girl, and I was like, what if I like was her? Um but like I don't know. Yeah.
right.
And but I think that much like women uh are have a there women have there's a lack of subjectification of women. We objectify them by default, and I think that there is a yearning for women to be subjectified, and I think in men there's a yearning for men to be objectified, and I think it kind of comes from that too. And we want to some like there's a lack in a man's ability to be helpless sexually, and I think a lot of men kind of want that deep down.
You say like a lot of men want that. Like I would say like a minority of men want that, but
I
like
think it's okay. I think it's all men. Okay, I mean all like 99%. But I think that it's just repressed. So like,
well, but
so wait,
it's like
but what I was saying, I think that women want to be objectified, but subconsciously they don't. And when you give them something they never had, and like I've blown so many women's minds by just not treating them the same as like other men. Just like I was just on a Tinder date, and she went up to me with like her pelvis out first, and she like walked up to me, and she's like, I like to be used and taken advantage of. And I was like, get in the fucking car, we're gonna get ice cream, okay, and you're gonna pay for your own ice cream, okay. And then and we ended up like getting naked, and I didn't just like immediately fuck her, and I just looked at her, and we were like, I held her while we were like naked, and she's like, I've never had anything like this before, and I just stared at her like face like really close, and then she just started crying.
interesting. Well, I think like the men do like to be objectified, but they like to be objectified as men. It's like, for example, like their penises. Like they like to be like objectified and like having their like penises admired or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
So I think that's very common. But I think like where the uniqueness with like the AGP that makes it like a sexual minority is that it's like the desire to be objectified through the process of feminization, which is like going against like the predominant like impulse to like masculinize yourself to complement the female sexuality, because I think that's sort of like the more like natural or like statistically normal process that would be like
That's a nice way to frame it,
normal.
because you describe yourself as AGP, right?
Yes, yeah,
Okay, I
that
like
was, yeah, yeah,
the way, I think that that's telling in the fact that you said to comp, because I think that I think it is kind of reaction. I think that we internalize. Let's see, I have to hold all these ideas. I think that the embodiment of it, of what I was talking about, is the wanting to be objectified. As you're young and you realize subconsciously or consciously that the way that happens as is by being a woman, and so you see like all these pictures of women, you're like, I want that, and you identify with that, and so it becomes like the being a woman, being dolled up, all of that stuff becomes wrapped into it, is how I feel. And I had another part of this, but I had to explain that
right.
part to get to the other part, and then I lost it.
Well, I also think like I would be remiss to not mention like I think the influence of like pornography and sort of like that process of when you're when you're watching the pornography, like who do you want to be? Do you want to be the like the female or the male? Like who are you projecting yourself into? And I
Yeah.
think with like the autogynephile, like particularly of the GAMP variety. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that terminology, where it's like there's some AGPs who like are specifically attracted to like the she-male body, and then they want to they're desirous of that, but they're also envious of that. So they like see that and then they want to be that as same thing. And for some AGPs, that's applied to like just regular females, and then other times it applies to like the feminized male. Um, and so I think that's like the key thing in this objectification process you're like teasing out, is that it's often like it, like I think that's like a huge like factor, because I've heard so many people say that like the first time they even like exposed to like the concept of transgenderism like is through pornography. It's like that's so common these days on the internet, and like
Yeah.
the prominence of like
Well, there
sissy
is there
porn and
is
stuff, and
yeah,
like
yeah. It's there is no porn that is really um like that is like healthy. Like there's totally, like, I can imagine like porn that would like not be like that bad if your like kid sees it, but most porn isn't that. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Most porn is like gonna but I, any porn, if you watch it, like, who would you rather be? Like the woman getting like all the attention, or just the side to
Well,
side afterthought afterthought?
it's hard for me to answer that because I'm AGP. So like obviously it seems natural and obvious to me. But like I don't know, like maybe for like regular, normal, masculine, heterosexual men who aren't AGP, like they are like just imagining how awesome it would be to be the guy in the situation. Like I don't know. Like
I Yeah, sure. But even when I'm trying to imagine being the guy, it's not that guy. I'm trying to imagine being a guy, and it's myself. But like the woman is like a person, and the guy is never a person in the porn. And you
right,
can't really
absolutely.
empathize with the man's experience. You can with the woman. It's all about her experience. Like her experience becomes like a object, like her face, her facial expression. You don't really see the guy going, you don't see the
Well,
guy.
well, that's why a lot of the like angles for the male centered pornography is like it's from the first person perspective of the guy. Like the camera is literally like on their head or something. So it's like that enables the like projection into like it's like a video game where like you are like embodying like that first person like
Yeah,
experience.
it's
I
hard to
think that's
find
like
that
very I feel like that's
POV.
pretty common. Like um but anyway, like I'm kind of curious. Like you mentioned that you're dating women, and I'm kind of curious like what's been like your process of like you know managing AGP and dating women. Has that been something that you've been successful with? Because I know like a lot of AGPs like have trouble with that, or sort of
I
disclosing that or talking about that? Is that
through
something you're like
thinking
open about?
no, okay, I'm not going to say this to start a cult because I cannot guarantee. I mean, I'm saying that facetious. I cannot guarantee the same results. Okay, but through the way I think about it, it used to be very overt AGP, and now through thinking about it as an embodiment of my attitudes about sex, about women, and about myself and my relationship to women in society and all these things, and talking to the women that I'm having sex with about these things, that I think it comes from. Through doing that, it's been zoomed out, and the AGP is just such a specific way to manifest what I actually am looking for, and I was completely fixated on that. But now I'm just trying to find space for me to be treated the way that I want to be treated. Um, and I am very jaded with because I used to be a femboy and I used to put a lot of work into my appearance and I used to shave all my body hair. And I don't like doing any of that. All of that isn't fun to do. So I I want to be I want to get the treatment. I want to be treated the way that I learned and or taught myself or was taught somehow by my environment that the way that I could get that treatment was by changing myself. And now I've changed my perspective from rather than changing myself from asking that from other people. And that is not an easy that doesn't completely answer your question. That's not an easy sell still. Um but it isn't a specific thing. So I think if you're talking about it with a partner more generally, like I like to be treated like this, and I don't want to be completely taking care of you the whole time. Um, it it's more natural than specifically do this specific thing to me, do this specific thing to me. I don't really get much out of that in general anymore. It's all about the relationship for me as I've gotten older. So
Do, do you date like heterosexual women or like
yeah,
queer women
um,
or both? Or
I've dated a
is
lot
there
of
like a difference in how they've like reacted to your AGP?
I've hooked up with a lot of lesbians, and I've hooked up with a lot of queer identifying women. Um, really, queer identifying just means probably more open minded in my opinion, experience. But
Right. Because my basic operating assumption is that your average normal 100% regular heterosexual woman is not super turned on by any whiff of like a male feminizing themselves or being feminine.
okay,
I think there's sort of like, just basic evolutionary psychology. I think there's like an attraction to like that more masculine archetype, which I think that masculine archetype exists like for like a reason.
no, I don't see it that way. I don't see it that way. I don't. I see it as caretaking roles, and the masculine archetype is like an archetype that exists for that. I think they like they want to be taken care of. They want to be objectified. They want to be told what to do and not have to think about what all these things are kind of a luxury during sex, and I think sex is generally, and especially in progressive society, the domain of women, and they kind of make all the rules during sex. And so, really, I mean, in progressive circles. And I think that it I don't think that I don't think any woman's ever going to be into the same thing as me very explicitly. I think that's very rare, and I'm never going to be into exactly the same thing. But we both want each other's genitals,
Right.
and
Well, does that make you feel like there's, like having this condition or the sexuality or whatever you want to call it? Do you feel like it's like limiting? Do you wish
no,
you wish you didn't have it? Are you happy you have it? Like, do you feel
no,
like it's like
I
making it
see it.
harder to date, easier to date, or
I see it as there's two types of women. Um, there are women that think there are women that understand that there is what I like and there was what works for me and that's what she likes and that works for her, and those are two different things, and we are collaborating on a process together when we have sex, and um and there's going to be women and men that like doesn't matter. There's going to be people that think that it's like I got an analogy. So like when I was younger, early 20s in high school, sharing music with other people was like a little bit more nerve-wracking because I was like, what if they don't like the same music that I like? And I was always like, I had this fantasy in my head of like the perfect person that's gonna hear the music that I connect with and get the same experience that I get. And I've learned over time that that's never the truth. That like nobody ever has gotten the same experience from music that I got from it when I show them it to them. Never. And so it's deeply personal. I think it's the same with sex. So I think that they like some people share with you the music that they like, and they're looking at you with like with like like baited like with their breath held, like waiting for you to have the same experience as them. And there's people that are show you the music they like and like expect you or not care if you like it too. It's just, this is what I like, this is what do you like, we don't have to like the same thing, and I want to share what I like with you, and I want to know what you like, and I want to share these things, and I want to learn to like what you like and the way you like it, and I want you to learn how to like what I like, and we'll be able to meet together in the middle somewhere. And that's how I see sex. It's the same thing.
Right. That's very interesting to me because I feel like you're sort of like average nice guy chump or whatever. Like they typically I think it's common to like center the female's sexual experiences and sort of like and like your pleasure is wrapped up in pleasuring like in the other person. Whereas I feel like the more like classical archetypal dominant masculine man, they sort of like center their own sexual needs in the moment. It's like I just want to get off, and like I don't care if you get off. And I feel like your thought is like interesting because it's sort of like you have like the AGP underlying predisposition, but you have a sort of like not I think like your typical AGP nice guy sort of like approach, which is to totally center the needs of the other person and the sexual experience. And like
Yeah.
and I think like that's sort of
Well, I do have that. And but I understand. So I'll be like, I want to please you. And so that could be one of like something I want to do. And I understand that my want to please her isn't even what she wants. Usually it's not.
right. Yeah.
Usually
Usually the women want you to please yourself and focus on yourself
they
because
want
that's
to please you.
that's part of the objectification
Yes.
process that they want. Like they want to be but yeah, but I think a lot of guys sort of like don't like pick up on that, or they sort of like don't realize that they want like that it sort of works out best for both people if you sort of center on like your own like, needs and
Yeah.
desires. Because I think it's hard because I think we've been like programmed to sort of like walk on eggshells and be really cautious and like not want to sort of like be that kind of like rough and tumble guy, to sort of like be the more sensitive guy, and like I'm gonna woo her by being like more sensitive than everyone else, and that sensitivity is going to like get me on her good side, and she'll be like, oh wow, you're such
Yeah.
a sensitive lover, as opposed to like the more
With me, it's all
like
like trying to like it's like how is there a way that we can construct a scenario where you are focusing on yourself and I am pleasuring you and you're not thinking about me at all? Is that something we can like make happen? Um, and I've made that happen many times. Uh, I just think that a lot of this dichotomy of different types, or I don't know about like Blanchard, but the way we're talking about it right now, excuse me, I think it gets confusing because really the way I see it is there are people that are just they have self-awareness and people that don't have self-awareness. And like for instance, I think that anybody can be gay. I think you can choose to be gay. You can just do it. And it might not like be your favorite thing, but I think that most people can just like they they're capable of it.
I just
And
don't I just don't think that's what being gay means. I think
I
I
know.
think when we're talking about gayness, we're talking about that's sort of like that thing that turns you on the most, which is the same sex attraction. And I don't think we can choose the thing that turns us on the most. It's like,
Yeah.
like
I
for the gay man, like the masculine male body is typically like it just turns you on more than anything else. And it's like, yeah, like you couldn't force yourself to develop um these sorts of like attractions or behaviors, but like that core sort of like primary attraction, like I don't think we can change that.
Well, yeah, but you could also become traumatized with women, and then I think a lot of lesbians are traumatized by men, and I think that's why so many lesbians have found me attractive. And I mean, I just made like a post, and like some people were like complaining about it. I made this post on Twitter, and I said that it's not immoral to hit on a lesbian as long as it's socially acceptable in every other way. It just means you're more likely to get embarrassed and get shot down.
Yeah, but aren't those more likely to be like political lesbians and not necessarily like actual like
Well,
real
yeah, but what's the
lesbians?
difference? I think that a
There is
political
the difference is the actual lesbians have that primary
I think that I
attraction and
know, I know, I know, but I think that the difference is just a political lesbian is like 3 steps down a 10-step path. They're only like they are the longer that you're a political lesbian, the more of a lesbian you're going to be.
no, see, in my experience, like there's so many stories of like actual lesbians dating political lesbians or sort of people who are maybe bisexual or queer because of these social cultural factors, but they don't have that like rooted primary desire. And then it comes to like getting in the bedroom, and then the actual lesbians are like, how come you don't like want to jump my bones? So it's sort of like they want to like date and be the romantic. They want that sort of like romantic relationship side of that like lesbian experience. But then when it comes to like actual getting down and like eating
I
out
just think
a
they're less
pussy,
lesbian.
like
Like they're less lesbian, but like yeah, I don't know. I just think they're less. I don't think there's like some inherent like magical difference between a straight person and a non-straight person.
that's crazy to me because I feel like that like primary sexual attraction in terms of like what turns us on the most. I think like that is one of those things that's just like so like of like all the things that would like count as like innate. Um,
No,
I
I don't
think
think it.
that would be like a good candidate for like the things that are like
Mm,
innate and programmed or
I think it's
relatively hardwired compared to other things.
I think it's really unlikely to be innate. Honestly, I think that it's really hard to change your primary like the things that you're primarily attracted to, and so the likelihood of you changing over the course of your life, you might change once, you might change like twice, but it's like other things will change a lot. It's not going to change a lot.
Why do you think evolution wouldn't program
Because it
like
makes no sense.
sexuality? Why well,
I
that
don't
makes
think
it
gay
makes
uncle theory
perfect
makes any
sense.
sense. I don't think gay uncle theory makes any sense. I don't think it.
Um,
I just think that these things are politically convenient narratives because we need to say that these things are inherent in order to get anybody to have any sympathy and pass legislation. Like if we want to make gay marriage legal, then we have to say, oh, if you're gay, you were born to be gay and it can't be
well,
changed
I
because
think
people think
we're
that if it can be changed, then like
so
you can't
I think we
respect
have
it.
to distinguish between like most people's sexual orientation is like innate and can't be changed versus like I think there is like a small minority where there's this phenomenon of like of sexual fluidity such that your actual orientation can change. I do think that's possible, and I think there's been like demonstrated cases of that, but I think that is a minority of people, and the majority of people it's like
Yeah, I agree.
you sort of have the primary attraction. Let's say you're a lesbian, you're attracted to women, it's a primary thing that turns you on the most. But then you sort of like have these compulsory normativity around the expectation that you sort of date a man, and like that can sort of like create desires for men or confusion about what your true sexuality is. And so I think like it's a process of like learning to like uncover that like primary attractiveness that you can't change, which is not to say that like
No,
you
I don't
can't
see
you
it that
can't
way.
you can't like fall in love with, you know, someone that
I
like
agreed with
primary.
all of your like observations of the reality we live in, but I don't agree that it's like innate. I just think that it comes up through your childhood, your parents, your relationship to the people around you, the stuff that you see on TV and the
Yeah.
magazines or whatever. And you might have some proclivities that chaotically interact with whatever you interact with that lead you down a certain path. And I absolutely believe that those proclivities exist, but I think they can manifest in completely polar opposite directions. And I don't think it really is like a one for one simple thing as you're gay or you're not gay. I just think that your sexuality has everything to do with your development.
I mean, to some degree, I agree with you insofar as like the very concept of like innateness is like problematic for any trait whatsoever, just because even something that's like we consider like truly innate, like eye color, you know, if you developed as an embryo in like a non-gravity or like a zero gravity environment, like that lack of like gravity is going to impact how
But
like
I don't think
the
that you're
cell formation. So like so yeah, there's always gonna there's for every trait,
I don't
regardless of
think who you
how
fuck
like
is like
innate.
eye color. I think that your behavior is not like your eye color. I think
No,
in
I was just saying
linguistics.
that like for eye color, e- even that there's like a combination of like nature and nurture for even things like eye color. So in that
Well,
sense, like eye color isn't innate because all traits depend on certain environmental, you know, nurturing to like manifest. So in that
but
sense,
you're
like,
saying
it's true. But
that, like, gravity would be the thing, and it's just, like, you would expect gravity. Okay, in linguistics, there's a divide, between, Chomsky and some other guy, behaviorists and the Chomskyites. And, the people that believe in Chomsky, who's probably right, believe that there is some innate thing about the human brain that is adapted specifically for language.
yeah,
And the behavior,
universal grammar or whatever, like
yeah,
a universal grammar
something
module.
like that. And it's true because like Coco and all these like animals that we teach language, they're they they're their use of language doesn't develop in the same way. They won't construct grammar or sentences. They'll just remember words, and they'll remember in context where you're trying to goad them into using the word to get the food or whatever. Okay, but it's really Coco couldn't really speak English that well. It's all a lie. Um, I do think that we are pre-built to learn language. Okay, um, so that is a proclivity and like a hard coded thing that on top of that so much variation in how that presents can spawn. So you can learn Spanish, you can learn, like Chinese, and you can have totally different grammar. You can learn no language, and if you don't learn language, you'll be like mentally retarded for your whole life. It'll like cripple your brain. And so so I don't I think that the things that are the proclivities are not they're so abstracted from the actual outcomes. They're not even the same type of thing. The thing that makes us able to do language is the way we think and structure things, but it isn't related to the language itself,
Yeah,
the
I
actual
mean,
behavior.
even if we grant that like there's some critical window in childhood where like, you know, our sexuality is like like being influenced by all these like, you know, cultural and environmental factors, like it seems like nevertheless like by a certain age parent they see things, it seems like the more relevant point is that it sort of like concretizes at some point very early in life such that, you know, you once it's there you like can't change it. For example, me like AGP like it's I mean, maybe it's like, um, you know, has an underlying genetic predisposition and it was just like triggered or is like crystallized by some environmental stimulus, and if that environmental stimulus wasn't there, it would have never manifested in the way it did. But so there's some combination of nature and nurture, but like once it's there, like just the fact that I have that predisposition, like it just sort of
I don't believe that.
it
I think that I'm very confident that it is not the clothes. Okay, I don't know if you could change that, okay?
yeah.
But I don't think it is I don't think the predisposition is the clothes or whatever specific interaction it is that you want. I think the predisposition is wanting to be objectified or wanting to get some of the stuff that women get in their sexual role, and I think that becomes embodied through all these other behaviors. But the predisposition is how I want to be treated, and the relationship I want to, like, you and your partner, the relationship I want to have with you, my partner. So I think that, so by breaking it down into those more bedrock things for me, I've been able to, like, that can be embodied in so many different ways, and I've learned that all these different ways are so much more satisfying. In fact, I've learned that another thing that can completely replace that is having a mommy kink, because I want someone to treat me like a kid. And that, I think that we kind of just treat women like kids, and having a mommy king, and women just like the AGP thing, mommy thing. Women don't like that one either. They don't. They hate that. I made this song with AI. It starts with the lyrics: "I've been good, mommy. Be in my body. I'll take you in, always inside me." And I've been jump scaring women with this song, and like asking if they want to be in a music video with me. And it's funny because like just so many women, they're just like, no, mommy, no, no, and they freak the fuck out. It's the same thing. It's really the same. It's the same to them as the AGP thing. The mommy thing to the woman is because they're in the same role and they're having the same dynamic and the same relationship to you.
Right. Well, I don't know if objectification is like the way to best characterize the nature of the predisposition, because I think from how it's like described in like the scientific literature, it seems like it's best characterized as a sort of like this concept of the erotic target inversion in some degree or another. There's sort of like this
Mhm.
normal process of like a heterosexual target, and then somehow that mechanism of like attraction gets like inverted in some way, such that the key mechanistic divergence from regular heterosexual men is that like somehow the attraction that's normally externalized got like partially inverted. I don't think anyone really knows what that inversion process looks like, because it's kind of, again, we're kind of operating at the level of like narrative and like metaphor, but it seems to be more not just like objectification. I feel like that's like more like a
Sure,
downstream.
that's a different aspect of it too. Uh, that aspect for me changed when I stopped wanting to put in effort to change myself, and my level of discomfort shaving all my body hair became greater than the amount of pleasure that I could ever, like, get from that. And so,
Like why I want to dig into that. Like why is that discomfort? Because I think for a lot of AGPs, the shaving of the body hair generates euphoria, and that
right,
euphoria is so powerful.
big
It
big
brings you
boner.
back to, yeah, boner basically.
Yeah.
Like it brings you back to like that behavior over and over and over, such that you just become
Yeah.
like
I can
like addicted to that euphoria.
yeah, so, I would like having, like, my body hair shaved, and I would like seeing myself as, like, a shaved person in sex and everything. But actually doing the shaving is like tons of time, and it's just sucked, like, at like spending all the time like getting dressed, and like we started learning some stuff about makeup and like stuff about my hair, and spend like clothes and all these things. It just was like I am it's making, like, I feel like these things make, no matter how much women say that they like these things, I think it actually makes women miserable, and I think it made me miserable. And I realized that, so not paying attention to those things made me a lot happier. And I realized this like through just being depressed and lazy. and then having sex and being like hairy and not looking like not being dolled up at all, and then having women totally fawn over my body. And like I was like, whoa, whoa, you're treating me the way I wanted to be treated, but I'm not doing any of that. And then I had this click, and I was like, I associated, I can get what I wanted in this interaction without even doing that. And once I felt that, once I experienced that, and once I felt that, that was game changing. And I was like, I'm never fucking doing this again. I don't need to. Holy shit.
Mm. So a lot of AGPs talk about this like distinction between like their like relative degree of like allosexuality versus their autosexuality, and some people say like depending on like that like relation, like if you're, let's say 70% allosexual versus like 30% autosexual, then like you have a better chance of like, sort of like repressing that like urge to completely feminize all the time. Whereas like if your autosexuality is like higher or like more dominant than your allosexuality, then like your sort of like ability to like kind of go the all natural approach and just like remain your like natural, masculine self in virtue of like not like putting in the effort to feminize yourself, like that sort of like it's just like hard to do. So I'm curious like whether you have like a conception of like your own degree of like auto versus
I
allo,
actually
whether you
just see this as more of a cluster B type thing. Like the I think that if your priority is like the makeup, it's just like as a catch-all, like the makeup, the shaving, the clothes, ever, it's like the makeup. And I think if it is that, like Ruby in my chat, I know you know Ruby. She said hot equals power, and I want power. And yeah, I think that the desire for the power is the thing that leads to that. And I'm not like saying like that cluster B or anything to be like discriminating. I think that it means like you had experiences in your childhood, and like me too. And it makes your relationship to sex one where you only ever, I feel like you can identify with sex and feel comfortable if you have power, and you see that becoming a mystified object to the other person as that power. And so you want to be that. So many women, they want to be the, especially young women, they want to be the seductress, and that is like a form of power, and they have all the power in the sexual role. Another thing that I think that I thought of before is, I think that men have a unique experience that affects the whole AGP thing, because most of the time the women that we end up with are younger, to like some amount, like a year or two younger. It's just like generally like how it ends up. And I've through dating older women, I've realized that, so all the things that you were kind of just like describing, like women, they don't want that, and they're not into AGP, they're not into the whole mommy thing either. Those, if you talk to older women, like, like 35, like 40, they are way more like willing to be like, no, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and they get it. And they're not like experimenting. I think like all these young women, they learn about sex through porn, and they don't really know what's going on with themselves either yet. And so um
well,
yeah.
isn't that also just because like as the older woman, if you're 40, like you don't quite, you're sort of like um desire for wanting the more like hot type of super passionate sex, or your interests are like securing a someone to have resources and provide and support and care and help care. And in that sense, like it doesn't matter if the provider is like more feminine or something, because like the more important thing is like, can they be like the good life partner? That was like the more
But yeah,
important
but
thing,
what
like
like I was saying before about like the music, I think that the super hot sex is like a myth in your mind. It's the same myth as believing that you can show the song that touches you, like really means a lot to you. You listen to the song every day when you wake up, and it's just like it means a lot to you, and you want to show that to someone else, and you want them to feel the same feeling as you, and then nobody ever feels the same feeling as you because it's that they don't have the same relationship to the song. I think that that's the same thing as the super hot sex. It's really not a real thing.
I bet some people are there are some people out there having like super hot, passionate sex. Like,
I think that the super hot part is just comes from higher stakes. So, um,
no, I mean,
when
I
you
think
say
there's something more.
passionate,
I think
like
there's
I
more.
think
It's more primal. It's like, you know,
loving sex, I think, is um a loving sex it comes from more intimacy, and more intimacy means a greater, like, because what you're talking about, this passionate sex, means less intimacy because you're saying it all has to be natural and without any communication or understanding. You're completely objectifying the other is you're completely subjectifying yourself, and you're completely going right for it. But that means that there's no intimacy because you're not thinking about the other person. You don't have any real
right.
conception of them.
Well, people like that
I know,
non-intimate
but I think
thought.
that
Like,
that's a young person thing. I think that as you get older, your chances of kind of wanting to have this
well,
more intimate interaction.
it's because your priorities have changed. It's,
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm saying that the intimate interaction, um, going into that dynamic, I just think it's as you get
it's,
older, it,
it's like just unrealistic to like expect that to be something that's like realistic or pragmatic for someone to like expect like to have like a sex life that's filled with like hot and steamy sex, and people should just like acquiesce and settle for like, boring
so
sex.
it's
Or
like when I show like if I show you my favorite song, you could be somebody that like makes your eyes bug out of your head and you start smiling really big, and I truly believe that you love this song just like I do, but you really don't. You're just selling it to me. And I think like a lot of people, young people, would be more people pleasy like that. And I think that this super hot, passionate sex, usually, almost always, 99.9999999% of the time, one of the people is actually faking it. And that's why it works in porn. I think that porn is all fake, and so like super hot for who? And for me, I stopped believing in the lie. I don't believe, like, I see through porn, and so I don't. It doesn't get me anymore, and I don't want somebody to be lying to me the whole time. So for me, what's super hot is actually a more honest and intimate interaction, and it's a little bit more, scummy.
yeah, I mean that's like interesting. I don't know. I'm sort of like basing some of this on your sort of like standard sort of like evo psych red pill type psychology, which that's people can like debate about that, but that's sort of like the basic dynamic that like that world or that framework talks about, is that it's not that like this hot sex doesn't exist. It's just that it's rare, and like only some people are having it because only some people like are hot enough to elicit that burning hot desire in people.
No,
And
I don't believe that. I don't even believe that that's how it works. I think that what the hot sex that I think is just, it just so happens that your what you want perfectly aligns with someone else, and you both are, like, to have that super hot like sex, you both have to be incredibly self-aware, which is usually not the case with these people. And you have to, because you have to be self-aware to know everything that you want and why you want it, and it has to
well,
perfectly line up with the other person. And so I think that if you aren't that self-aware, you're going to be running into issues where you are doing things that are not what you truly want. And there's always a lot of ambiguity in sex. There's always a lot of things that you don't that aren't perfect for you, and there's never that perfect sex. And I don't think the perfect sex comes from them just being hot enough. Like, I've been with people that I think are super hot, and it doesn't change the fact that like whatever they want and whatever they enjoy during sex never perfectly aligns with what I want.
I think you might be unusual though. I think like you might not be a representative sample for the
I
general
just think, well, that's what I was saying before. I think that I'm just more
population.
self-aware.
Yeah. Well, what about like paraphilias and stuff? Because like, suppose you have a foot fetish, like, your sex just regular vanilla sex is going to be presumably far less hot and get you going than like the type of sex that involves your foot fetish or whatever. So like it seems like in that case it'd be very clear and easy to like to distinguish between like the types of sex where like you're just sort of doing it versus like the type of sex where like you're incredibly aroused because you're like getting this one specific like paraphilic interest met. Like
I have given myself a foot fetish on purpose to see if I could, and I did. And and so and it's such a great cheat code because the feet are something women don't enjoy. So I know that if she's letting me like experience her foot, it means it's only for me. And that's reason it works for me is because I know it's for me. And so the thing about the foot fetish thing is like and it's like, it's just another thing, another tool in the tool belt. But I it's such a good cheat code, but it can be incorporated in anything else. Like just in missionary, just put her feet in your face. And it's like literally like
yeah, I think that is unusual to be able to at that late in life, like
I
to
think
be
I'm
able
just
to
more
just
self-aware.
yeah, I mean, also I feel like so with like AGP there's this concept of like meta attraction or like pseudo bisexuality such that we can like sort of, your like primary attraction is like gynephilic attraction to femininity, but you can sort of like force yourself into having attraction to men in order to satisfy
Mhm.
like the validation aspect of like the AGP. And I feel like it sounds like when you're saying like you gave yourself a foot fetish, it's like analogous to sort of like these AGPs who like turn themselves into purely androphilic, attracted to men only. It's sort of like, yeah, like you you can do that, but only because like in some sense it's like satisfying the deeper primary attraction, which is the inversion to some degree or another.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, that's what I'm getting at though. The deeper primary attractions though, that's what figuring out what those are and then they can be embodied in so many different ways. And I think that this can work with like really any type of sexuality you have. I think that the whole normie sex like sexuality is just being stupid and not really knowing what you want and you're never going to be that fulfilled if you're like that. Honestly, I think
See, I just have been around enough men and like been in enough men's spaces and heard men talk where I think like it's just simpler. Like they just have simpler,
Mhm.
more straightforward desire. They just really want to like bang a hot chick. Like I think that's like basic male psychology 101. I think that's like I don't
I
think
would only agree with you. I would only agree with you if you showed me those men. So here's where I get like more scientific. If your data of those men correlated with those men all having really good childhoods, then I would believe it. But I think we're all a little bit fucked up. So
yeah. I mean that's probably definitely true, but I nevertheless think that like evolution sort of like hardwired us enough of these like modules or instincts or patterns or like proclivities or dispositions, whatever you want to call them, to sort of like ensure the continued survival of the species, like regardless of how like fucked up our childhoods are. And I think in some cases, if you have more vulnerability, that childhood insult can sort of like mess you up and cause you to deviate in a way. You develop like these paraphilias, but like paraphilias are like I mean they're
it,
pretty common, but
it
like
means it gets in the way.
yeah
It's when you define it as a paraphilia when it becomes something that hinders your actual ability to perform, right? And it makes comes at a cost.
yeah and I feel like that's like what happens with like AGP is like you know it's very common I think for men with AGP to sort of try and do the I'm just a regular heterosexual guy. I'm going to have regular heterosexual sex, but then they become like they have like performance issues. They can't keep it up. They're like in their heads. They're like get dysphoric or they sort of like don't feel like it feels performative, or they dissociate from their bodies, or there's all these things that like prevent
Yeah, but
sort of like.
that's not fair because when you say it becomes performative, like I think that an AGP is inherently already performative.
Well, the AGP itself, as AGP, in my opinion, would be like equivalent to one of these like primary like attractions that are like more or less innate, or
I don't think it's. I think that
mostly innate. Like
I think that the AGP is not the primary part. I think that the the primary part is probably has to do with a certain neediness. Um, I think it has to do with your mom, and
dude, that's too Freudian for me. I feel like
yeah,
you're going too far into like the more like narratological psychology versus.
psychodynamic.
Yeah, it's too psychodynamic. It's too depth. It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think like depth psychology and stuff like this like has its place and it's useful, but I feel like it has to also be like supplemented with a more like
But
clinical like.
I'm admitting that there are proclivities and there are the baseline proclivities. I'm just saying that I think that the baseline is deeper than the one you're saying.
So yeah, that's interesting because I know a lot of the their your sort of classical sexologist Ray Blanchard story of AGP is that like AGP comes first and then it causes everything else. And even though the subsequent developments, manifest in like all these different ways, and I think like a lot of the resistance to the theory of autogynephilia from non-self-aware AGPs, or trans women in denial, they say, "Oh, that doesn't resonate with my experience." It's like it doesn't feel like that is like the root cause, or it's just like one of many factors. It's like, oh, I didn't transition primarily because of that. It's just like one tiny aspect. So they would say there's like a third thing, or there's like something underneath that causes like all of it. And it sounds like you're wanting to just like complicate that like causal story such that there's like more dynamically self interacting nature nurture things, and like AGP is not necessarily like the root to nature.
But it
It's sort of
can be a route for other things though. Like I think that a lot of the Ray Blanchard stuff is still pretty great and applicable, and there's a lot of research, and I think like it's like a tree, and I just think that the AGP experience is a really powerful, strong pinpoint that we can focus on. That is even a cultural touchstone that we can focus on. That we can all kind of understand what we're talking about. It's an experience that people have,
yeah.
and I
And
think that it comes from other things.
I think one reason to suspect that like that AGP thing is like this foundational innate thing that drives everything else is the sort of similarities in the life stories across the AGP experience. Like there's so much shared similarity in the life story. Like the sort of archetypal life pattern of the AGP follows a very similar trajectory in so many cases. And also the sort of like personality characteristics that are very common.
But that's
Typically
just
AGPs are like, more your autistic computer tech math type,
well, yeah.
person.
But
There's
if
like
you
there's stereotypes
If
like.
you yeah, but it's just if you find a specific point in which you're going to compare people with the same attribute are going to also share other things. I think it's just makes sense. It reminds me of the whole like sexed brain thing, which I don't believe. I think all the science behind people having sexed brains is like total like bullshit in my mind.
You don't
Like for
think there's
instance,
any innate sex
no,
differences in neurological
I think
patterns?
that there are some, but like nature versus nurture and stuff, a lot of them can be informed through your physiologically, through your hormones and stuff. For instance, okay, people that play violins, if you look at the brains of people that play violins, they are distinct from people that don't play violins. It's not because they were born to play violins, it's because they learned to play violin. And so the part of their brain that goes into fine hand motions and stuff like that, and the part of their brain that listens to sounds and all the skills that they need, those they built their brain to do those things. So And just like ADHD, I think that ADHD is honestly more of a personality disorder that is the result of trauma. I think a lot of instances, not all, but a lot of instances of what we call autism, because there is such a high correlation with autism and cluster B personality disorders too. And those cluster B personality disorders are then like attributed to trauma. And so like there's like a really high correlation between BPD and autism. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. I just think that a lot of what we call autism is it is autism. It like the autism umbrella works perfectly for it, but I think that it comes from you in your childhood are dissociating from parts of yourself that are harmful because of the environment that you're in.
But I sort of want to push back on this idea that there's no innate sex differences at the neurological level, because
Okay.
it just in theory it just doesn't make sense to me that there wouldn't be that. Because for one, like, you have like a baby deer, they get born, and as soon as they're born, they have like the hardwired neural circuitry to like walk. So like to some extent, ev- evolution is capable of like hardwiring like pretty sophisticated behavioral cognitive circuitry for developing walking patterns, which is a pretty complicated like thing to do at birth, and other like
I think there are
things. and,
differences.
and like
There are
we have these like like a innate fear of like snakes and spiders and these kind of
Yeah, sure.
hardwired dispositions.
I'm not disagreeing with any of that. I'm just saying, okay, I think that the science shows there are some very minor differences, like
Well,
innately born from when you're.
minor differences can blow up and like
But I think that
become
yeah,
big
but
differences. Like,
I think that if you observe an adult male and an adult female's brain, the big differences that we can see are not innate. I think that the big differences that we can see are the result of I think the biggest effect is hormones and
yeah, no,
hormones for your development.
that is true, but I think the sort of the female brain that's been exposed to a higher testosterone wash in like the in the womb or whatever, like they're going to have a more masculinized brain relative to other females, but their brains are still like female typical. So it's not that they like, because they have a higher testosterone wash, they now have a male brain. It's just that they have a relatively more masculinized brain compared to other females. But I would still say that like they they would have a brain of a female, just because like, but I don't know. But these sorts of debates about like, I've heard there's this concept of like neurosexism. Like a lot of people are like just really resistant to the idea that there's like innate neurological sex differences or any sort
I
of
think
like.
there are. It's just I like so we keep focusing on these like innate things as if it's easier to prove that than it is to disprove them, and it's so much easier to disprove them, and it's so much easier to prove, like for instance with the violinist example, and with the hormones and with um like I think that so much of female behavior, while some of it may be predetermined, like predisposed, I think that so much of it is because of the world that we live in. And same with like male behavior. And like aside from like testosterone making you like do 100 push-ups when you see a hot girl or whatever, like I just think that there is not really preordained. I think the biggest preordained behavioral distinguisher is going to be hormonal.
Yeah, well,
There's like
like,
the only other ones, there's like the spatial thing where men have slightly better spatial like intelligence minorly, like yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's also like the sort of classical interest in, people versus things, but that also is like influenced by testosterone. And I'm not saying that like, yeah, it's obviously nature and nurture. It's, nature via nurture to some degree or another. Yeah. Danny in the chat says we're talking about the difference in effect size. I think that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the effect size of the
Yeah.
nurture is way bigger than the nature.
Yeah, but it's also, to a large extent, males and females, like had to solve the same sorts of problems, staying alive, finding food,
Yeah.
perceiving the world accurately. So a lot of our brains are going to be very similar in most things, but like it's where there is like differing selection pressure on the distinct evolutionary mating strategies that arise from
Yeah.
like our basic, like if you are producing millions of cheap sex cells like every day, sperm, then like you're gonna have a different strategy. So it's like all the sex differences stuff, even if they're minor and small effect sizes, they show up in the realms where you would expect to have like distinctive evolutionary problems that like the problem for a female when they're dealing with like mate selection or reproduction or like birthing and all these things. So it's like in the realm of like relationships and dating and sex is like where we see the differences emerge, and like all the other stuff in terms of just like being regular normal humans who have human problems, like that's where we have all the similarities, and there are tons of overlapping similarities between males and females such that we're largely the same. Our brains are largely the same, but it's like when you get into these specific like contexts that you would expect these
Yeah. I mean,
distinct
women seem to be more susceptible to social contagion. Men tend to be more risky. I don't know. I think there might be something to some of those things,
Yeah. I mean, we
but
also see this showing up at the level of like, the transgender phenomenon, such that the phenomenon of like transness and gender dysphoria showing up in like young adolescent females is like very different from how it manifests in like young adolescent males who are largely of the AGP disposition. So like that like AGP type versus like your sort of like rapid onset
well, that's
social.
because the AGPs want to be objectified, and the women want to be subjectified, and they don't want to be objectified. So
Well,
they're
the reason why is because there's these innate sex differences, but that make males different than females.
no, that
Like,
you can say that, but I mean, I don't know. Sure, you can say that.
I think you can say it based on like just the yeah. I mean, think a lot of where
There's
like
so much
where
sociologically going
where
on there. There's so much sociologically going on there that we can talk about that can account for a lot of that.
yeah. I don't know. I think it is. I think we're like circling around a sort of like disagreement on like the extent to which we believe evolutionary psychology is like a viable and relevant and like interesting field of study that has a
Yeah,
lot to say. Because like for there's some people who are like, yeah, I like Eva Psych, and also I think Eva Psych is like super relevant to all these like contexts in our modern world. And then there's other people who are like, yeah, maybe that's true in some narrow context, but for the vast majority of things I care about, that has nothing
I
relevant to
I
say at
like
all.
Evo Psych. I think that pop Evo Psych is like the death of thought. And I think I was listening to somebody that like it really is just like because when there's so much to talk about sociologically that can affect these things, and we just dismiss it all and just say Evo Psych, and we just end the conversation there, and it's just so
Yeah.
thought terminating. And like I was talking to somebody called Maiden Monster, and she was telling me that even though she is a Evo Psych type like you, she finds it really interesting that and I don't know, like she was like trying to like underhanded compliment or something, but she's saying even though the Evo Psych stuff is all correct, people who believe in blank slateism have higher IQs statistically. So, so I mean, it's
Well,
just so much to
that
account for
but
sociologically.
but
So
that's because to believe in pure blank slateism, you have to buy
I
into this
don't.
sort of like academic intellectualization coming out of like modern like feminist gender theory that sort of says like sex itself and the sex binary is itself like a social construction just as much as like gender is a social construction, which is like the whole Judith Butler thing is like, oh well, you thought gender was a social construction, well it turns out even biological sex is a social construction. And they sort of like just the whole program is just like wants to deny any sort of like innate sex difference at all. That's sort of like, and I think there's like a strong political feminist like motivation to do that, which I think has been like it's been regressive, and it's prevented us from making progress in the sciences of like understanding human nature. And I think, but yeah, you can definitely swing too far and just like,
I'm definitely
you have
not the
like
Judith Butler type. I really, really not. Like I don't think that the sex in itself is like I was saying with the violinist thing. No, I think there are differences between men and women, but I think that the only places that so I think that we can't test to prove nature, but we can test to prove nurture. And so it's the
you can
only interesting
absolutely,
thing
you can definitely test to prove nature. Like
by
that's like,
excluding nurture. That's the only way you can test for
yeah,
it.
but you exclude it by running very careful
But you're still
experimental
testing for
tests.
nurture. You're testing for nurture though. When you test for nature, you're always testing against nurture.
You sort of,
Always.
but you make an assumption about the evolutionary environment in the ancient past where we were under these selection pressures. You hypothesize a selection pressure, and
Right.
then you make a prediction that like,
And
well,
it's just stupid.
if this was true, you'll expect to see this pattern show up in the present moment, and then you test for it. And if that pattern shows up, the inference to the best explanation is that that pattern is a result of the hypothesized mechanism that solves that evolutionary problem, which is not to say that like there's no sociological influence. It's just that you sort of like extract through that.
You ignore it, and just because you have some fantasy idea in your head that you want to prove, and you start with an assumption and you
It's
work
not
backward
like
from there.
the idea that we are evolved animals is not a fantasy assumption.
Yeah,
Like,
but the idea that we specifically have this specific thing that we evolved for, you come up with some specific thing that you want to, like, like it's not like a theory, as in like when when I put a molten ball of nickel into a jar of honey, the honey will do this or whatever. It's not like it is like it is a theory of the reason that I have observed that we're like this. And I'm going to say the reason for it is because I have this theory about how we evolved. And you can't test for that theory ever. You can only attest against the socialization. And so often we can learn. And so the only place to focus is the socialization. And I do think that there are differences between men and women. There are differences between races, but I don't think it's useful to make these assumptions about people. I think that we're more alike than we are different. We're way more different sexually than we are racially, but by
well,
far.
what do
But
you mean it's not useful? You think the whole field of evil psych should be shut down because it's like
no,
has
I just
serves
think
no
it's
purpose?
misused.
Like,
I just think it's misused.
well, it
I
being
think
misused by pop.
I see Evo Psych as a trash can. Okay. It is so after you've tested for all the social stuff, you end up okay, it maybe not a trash can. Okay. Maybe let's call it a receptacle for diamonds. Okay. After you test for all of your social stuff, sometimes you're left with a diamond and you get to put it in the Evo Psych thing. And you're like, we found it. We found the diamond. But you can't say
Yeah.
that you have the diamond until you've tested all the other shit.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think like I don't know. I mean, maybe this is just like my own biases, but I just feel like evolution is so like understanding our animal nature and not just our human nature is like so important to understanding human nature that like to sort of like have your default to start with the sociological, I think that sets you up for potential
No,
confusion. And you guess like
but you
it's
only test for the sociological to find the nature, is what I'm saying. Like
no, you just start.
somebody in my chat says you can test infants, you can test separated twins. Yeah, you can do twin studies. Twin studies are not testing for nature. They are testing for nurture. And then when you don't have a result that indicates nurture, then you make an assumption that it was nature, which is not a proven thing. It's just that's the only explanation that you have left. And it doesn't even prove it then.
I'm not
It
sure
still
that's like
doesn't
the
even prove it.
logic of how twin studies works. Like the twin studies is based on the assumption that like you can sort of quantify the degree of hereditary like
As an
aspect.
exclusion from, yeah, if you can
It's like
remove
100% versus 50% versus 0%. And then use that quantified heritability to make estimates about like the degree of whether something is like innate, and then you just do statistics. I mean, it's like it's a really solid like methodological assumption, and I feel like it's not that. I think you think it's harder than it really is to like peer through the veil of
Yeah.
socialization and discover like actual nature. I think like
It's really, it's
yeah, but
almost
like
impossible.
yeah, the like pop Evo Psych stuff is definitely like, like Pearl
Andrew
Davis or
Tate
some of these,
bullshit.
but like I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like the actual, because real Evo Psych is based on like the very solid hypothesis, the very solid assumption that like in the evolutionary past, a female has a different like problems to solve than males do when it comes to like the reproductive strategy of like the large gamete producers versus like the small gamete producers. And based on that basic assumption, you have like the basic parental hypothesis, the like parental investment hypothesis is like it's solid. And from there, it's like a foundation to just have a theoretical superstructure to understand so much of like, because it's not just like understanding us, it's like understanding the degree to which our behavior overlaps with the animal kingdom, because we can see corollaries in the animal kingdom for so much of human behavior. And like, why? Because we're animals. So it's like I am like so yeah, I don't know, but I feel like we're like been circling around this like same topic for like quite some
Yeah, I
time. And
just
maybe it's just like really great.
I'm not
To agree to.
I'm not against Evo Psych. I'm just saying that I think that the only thing that did like I think that when you are testing, this person said I selectively read their comment, so I'm gonna read the rest of your fucking comment. Okay, the rest of their comment about the twin says, if anything, you can't test nurture, because it's downstream from nature. What created the nurture? The nature. Okay, yes, exactly. So after you've excluded all of your nurture examples, then you are left with a golden nugget or diamond. Then you put it in your diamond receptacle because you found something that nothing else can explain except for nurture. And excuse me, nothing else can explain except for nature. But you can't. Nature is an assumption, and what you have to prove it against everything
But
else.
it is a very solid assumption to make.
It's a solid
Based,
assumption to make that
it
nature. It is a solid assumption to make that there is nature. For sure, guaranteed. There are proclivities, there is nature, there are sexual differences for sure. There is for sure different sexual selective like roles and needs, women had to face different problems than men, even though that manifests differently in different cultures throughout like history and stuff. And like in ancient China, like they had like so many women like fighting as warriors just with pole arms because they didn't need to have the strength, and it was just, and that made them win wars. And back in hunter gatherer times, women did plenty of hunting, and we've mythologized it against that, because we've come up with some theory, some evo psych theory that women were all gatherers and men were all the hunters. That's bullshit. That's actually
well,
not
the women who hunted didn't hunt the same. They hunted smaller game, whereas like the males
sure.
typically hunted like the
Yeah,
bigger
because they're
game.
weaker and smaller.
Yeah, like
They're weaker and smaller, but
yeah.
that doesn't mean that
Well,
they behavior they like that's like saying
yeah,
that women like it's like having a culture where literally everybody arm wrestles except women. But like there's weight classes, and because there's weight classes,
right.
men are arm wrestling other, like they're still the fucking arm wrestling, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, it does matter because there's still like, if it's like if 10% of the females in your tribe like hunt, but like 90% of the males do, it's like,
That's
yeah,
not
like
what we were
you could
saying.
say that like women and men both hunt, but it's like you can still extract out these like relative patterns. But I think that the reason why I like to push on like Eva Psych stuff is because I see so much in the popular culture. Yeah, there is like these popular Eva Psych people like Andrew Tate or whatever, Pearl Davis, but there's also like a equal contingent, particularly in the leftist progressive woke circles, to completely repudiate it and to try to debunk it. Like Munecat, the YouTuber, just came out with this video that has like over 1 million views saying like I debunked Evo Psych. And
Well,
someone
that's bullshit.
who's like ignorant of like the topic might come away from that video thinking that like there's no validity whatsoever to Evo Psych, and like that's
Well,
what I want to push back
that's a
again.
problem.
Like,
Well, yeah, okay. Well, I'm not saying that there's no validity to Evo Psych. I'm not saying anybody that's saying, oh, I debunked Evo Psych is dumb. I'm just I'm s- I My thing is that when you are testing for nature, you are testing against nurture. And the interesting place to be looking, regardless of which one you're focused on, is always the nurture. Because like the focusing on the nature is focusing on your theories and hypotheses. Focusing on the nurture is actually focusing on the data in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, but sometimes like the data is hard to find, and that's what makes science difficult. I mean, I think doing EvoPsych properly is really, really hard. It's like it's actually
Yeah.
hard to do it, but it's like but also in just the same way that people accuse like the evolutionary people of coming up with these just so stories, like you can do the same thing with culture. You can come up with these just so stories about culture that sound convincing, but like they're just as made up as any random story about like how the giraffe got its like long neck or whatever. Um, um, so someone asked in the chat about whether or not sensory processing disorder has anything to do with AGP, and someone was like, "Well, I wonder that too. I hated male clothing as a young boy, largely due to sensory issues with fabrics." That was definitely something in my case. Like, I did not like scratchy textures as like a young boy. Like, I was always very insistent that like my mom had to cut off the tags and like the clothing has to be like certain amount of softness, and that like developed like the very first manifestation of my AGP was like a fetish for like hosiery and stockings because of like the unique like sensory texture of like those things, which I think is
I only like those things if I have shaved legs.
oh yeah, that's because it's like a sensory texture thing. But I think it's very common. I think this is very common um for AGP. Is something to do with like sensory stuff and
Okay, well,
like
here's an experience like so yeah, I can understand, I can relate to that. But and it's funny, Phil Illy in my chat just said, hereditarianism is true, culture shells stay losing. Okay, well, I just wanted to acknowledge because you know he's part of the conversation. But um I have multiple times with shorts on gone through an area with poison ivy, and because of my hairy legs, I don't get it. I get a little bit on my ankle maybe, but my hairy legs saved me. And that's a sensory benefit that I hold to very high esteem.
yeah. Are you like walking around in the woods all the time? Like
Yeah.
is that like a concern?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is interesting with like the sensory processing thing because typically that's like I think that'd be associated with like autism, like the sensory processing thing. And like, but as Danny pointed out in the chat, like not all AGPs are autistic. I'm not autistic and I'm AGP. So like I'm definitely like, but I think I'm like in the minority. But I'm like, I feel like I'm on the like the verge of like being autistic. I have some sensitivity to things, but like I think I'm more sensitive than your average person, but I'm not like so debilitated by it that it becomes like clinically or even subclinically like relevant at all. But I think
I actually think, and this is really controversial. Like I mentioned, I alluded it to it before, so I want to touch on it. Like, I actually think now, and I'm not 100%. I'm not like I don't have evidence or proof, but I think that severe autism and what you're talking about, which is like spectrum, you're like somewhere on the spectrum a little bit, right? You may be a little bit on the spectrum. Um, I think that those are different. I think I really do think that the spectrumy discussion is something to do with your childhood, and it is different from like severe autism.
yeah, I mean I do think that's right because my wife is like pretty severely autistic, like not just like a little spiciness here and there, but like actually like it's like to the point where like you know like a loud noise can like deeply dysregulate her entire like nervous system in like a fundamental super deep way, and like
Yeah, but
it's like
that trait and that specifically that trait that is common amongst people with childhood trauma.
well, often the childhood trauma is a result of having these autistic sensory processing issues and like having them not
Mm.
accommodated or recognized. So it's like I think to some extent, um, it's like a chicken and the egg thing
Yeah.
because it can be very traumatic to grow up autistic in a world that just assumes that you shouldn't have any problem with like fluorescent lighting or whatever. You have to like, spend your whole life around these, highly incredibly sensory um, things.
Yeah. I never got the I hear people talk about fluorescent lighting all the time. I never I kind of I rather like fluorescent lighting.
That is weird. That is highly unusual.
It is very weird.
Yeah,
Yeah.
most people hate it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, is in my college dorm, like we had the dorm rooms are so like the walls are just like white and the floor was like white laminate and the ceiling was like white and there's just really bright fluorescent lights on the ceiling and I loved it because everything was so bright and I could like illuminate because I was in painting and so I was like I always want to have super bright fluorescent lights plastered on every room of my house always because I can perfectly illuminate every painting or every I need everything to be perfectly illuminated, a maximum light all the time.
I know I've watched in some of your videos in the past about HEP. You mentioned that you didn't transition because one reason you mentioned I think was like your dad sort of like said that's like a bad idea, and then you were like convinced by that argument. So I'm kind of curious, like for the sake of my audience who may not be familiar with like your story, like why did you not like end up transitioning? Like, or well, I guess
I
I'm curious, like
So I just
what was like the thought process?
I asked my dermatologist if she could I talked to her about like, oh, maybe I could do go on hormones. And she told me that I could she would get me in touch with a hormonologist. There's a word. I don't know what the word is, but whatever the doctor. Um and I told my dad and he's like, I'm gonna do some research. And he like printed out like drug like safety data sheets. Um he like went like into super my dad is super severe autistic. But he went into super severe autism mode, and he started printing out like safety data, medical say MSDS sheets about like these like hormones and stuff. And he's like, I don't think it's a good idea. This is bad for you. And I was like freaking out. I was like, all the things that you're saying are bad for me. Are those are the things I want. I want those to happen to me. I don't care if I can have kids. I want better skin. I don't care about all these negative things. And I'm just glad that he didn't because I feel like my life would be so much worse. And like I was saying, I had that epiphany where I realized that I could be treated the way I wanted to without changing myself. I learned that having hairy legs and walking around in the woods is it protects me from poison ivy. And I learned that like, oh, actually women are actually into my body and I don't even have to change anything. They're already into me. I just need to have an intimate relationship where they connect with my wants and I connect with their wants. And I started thinking about it in a whole different way where I didn't have I didn't like it was instead of like seeing it as I am a puzzle piece and a woman is the rest of the puzzle. For lack of better, like maybe we're both half of a puzzle, all right? And there's an edge of jigsaw puzzles and we're supposed to match. And I'm thinking I have to build myself so that all of the edges of my jigsaw perfectly align with what matches with the desired outcome. But I learned that I learned that it's much more like gelatinous and I don't need to change what my puzzle edge looks like. I just need to communicate, and then we're both kind of so like we both look like this, and we won't mush. And then we get together, and we're like, "Hey, I kind of like you," and it's like, "Okay, let's figure this out." And it's like, "Okay, like we kind of works now." And then that's life. That's what I think. So
Did you ever have any like a body dysmorphia stuff? I know you mentioned like
yeah,
the body hair. Was there anything
I have
else
it
that
now.
you had like this? Yeah, you
I
wouldn't
feel like I'm getting
mind saying
fat
more.
and in the body hair. Oh yeah, I wish I could just be. I wish I could just be Taylor Swift. Um, that'd be great. Oh man,
Yeah,
my life would be so much better as a woman. Think about it socially. I think about it socially. Oh man, and they're just so hot. And I don't know. It's just in so many ways. But I don't
yeah,
actually think that I can be a woman though.
yeah.
If there was
There's like
if there was a perfect transitioning drug or something, like I just don't think that you can get what you want. Or I could get what I wanted. Um, I think a lot of it was also like I think a lot of the whole femboy thing, and I was a femboy, 100%. I think a lot of it is not wanting to age, and wanting to stay young, and I
Yeah, I
think a
think
lot.
yeah, I think
Yeah,
fear of male pattern baldness is I think like a huge driver of a lot of like um, tr- males transitioning. Like sort of, I think that's like a huge one. Like 'cause it's sort of
I don't
like
have to worry about that one because my Greek heritage, they're all my like, I go to a family thing and they all have, like, so much hair, and my hair's so thick, and I don't have to worry, so I'm pretty lucky.
so with so many transness is all in the media. It's so popular. It seems to be like the incidence is like rising. Both, it's like it's not just like the females where there's like a rising incidence. It seems like the males there's a rising incidence. And like the trans activists want to say that like, well, it's because there's like decreased stigmatization. So we're just like it's like left-handedness or something. But I'm kind of curious like what your thoughts are like on the future of how AGP is going to be manifested. Like, do you see that, any prediction for like, more people starting to take an approach that you did, which is like realizing that like this medicalized classic transsexual pathway that has been traditionally sold as like the only viable pathway to manage autogynephilia is like you think like that narrative is going to change, and there's going to like develop like some new understanding of like new ways or like new possibility models, because that's one thing I'm trying to do with like in my own detransition process is like to think about like whether there's ways to manage this without the full-blown medicalization pathway. And also it's not just the medicalization pathway, it's like I think the more pernicious aspect that impacts your life is not the medical stuff. It's like these sort of like taking on this female persona in society such that there's now this like new narrative and expectation such that people have to like pronoun you differently, or they have to like pretend that you're like a woman. It's like I think
Yeah,
like that's what like I
it
think
it's
challenges people's
can I
like
say something really controversial about that? I think that specific step is almost a diagnose or, no, it's not, it's a prescription of narcissism. Because narcissism is when you believe that everybody's opinion of and thoughts about you should be under your own control, and you don't really think about. So it's almost like we're telling people that the solution to your problem is to become a narcissist. And
right. I think that's that, right? Because when you sort of like base your happiness on everyone else perceiving you to be a woman and validating that and using the right pronouns, and your entire day is ruined by the fact that you got misgendered at the grocery store, which I heard so many trans women, they're like, just go on the internet and talk to any trans woman or these forums or communities. Like, yeah, like, my day was ruined because some stranger did not see me as a woman. It's like, I think they're
yeah,
like, so that's so psychologically unhealthy to base
and I feel so
your,
bad for
yeah,
them. I see, because I really think that they were sold that as a prescription. That's like we're telling them that that is healthy, but it's actually unhealthy,
yeah.
and
And
they're victims.
you're not just saying that that's like a healthy mindset to take. You're saying that everyone else is a bad, evil, bigoted,
Yeah,
discriminatory, hateful person because they don't have this particular metaphysical, philosophical belief about the nature of sex and gender and like blah blah blah. Like,
yeah, and the really
and
scary truth is that you actually just can't get what you want,
right.
and that's the horrifying reality of it.
Yeah, but I do think you may be onto something in terms of like it being a lack of self awareness, because I do think that there are like a lot of trans women out there, or just trans people in general, who like just seem to be like completely lacking self awareness. And I think this is kind of like an autistic thing to some degree or another. It's like a lack of like social. It's not just a lack of self awareness, because I think they're often highly introspective, but it's like a lack of like social awareness of like how other people are like perceiving them, or sort of like the subtleties of like how
Well, you
people
know
are
what?
are perceiving them.
Maybe they don't wanna care. And you know what? Fuck
Yeah,
yeah. Like, maybe you don't have to fucking care, you
yeah.
know?
I mean,
Somebody
yeah,
I
I
heard
mean,
somebody say this before. They said that, okay, there's certain trans people that you when you look at their transition glow up process, it's like kind of obvious. Not all trans people, obviously, but like some people, there's like you don't actually want to fit in. You want to look different, and
yeah.
it's like they're like, yeah, I don't. I feel like part of them is like, I want to look weird. I don't want to look like everyone else. I
Well,
want.
that is a result of the autogynoandromorphophilia, which is this idea that a lot of trans women, increasingly, they don't their ideal their like idealized form is not to be a female. Their idealized form is to be a she-male. And invariably, that idealized form, that's why they often don't do voice training, because they like, you know, pass relatively well,
I kind of respect that.
but they don't do voice training because they like are because their idealized form is okay being perceived as this like he, she, boy, girl, she male, lady boy sort of thing, where it's like, and like, yeah, and I think that sort of attitude is like healthier, because when you have
Yeah.
an identity as like when you explicitly identify as like a trans feminine person, as opposed to saying like, nope, I'm just a regular woman like any other woman, no different than any other woman. Like my past, the fact that I was born male is like completely irrelevant. That's just like a random private medical happenstance that's completely irrelevant to my woman. I think like it's like those sorts of people, like that's where I think all the psychological problems come. I think the people who are like comfortable being trans, like that, it's like much easier to be well adjusted. I think like
Yeah, and honestly, um, those trans people, if they are also attracted to like other trans people like that, it's like, oh my god, like just I don't know, like if you just like you meet like a group of them, but like and they're all really sexually fulfilled. I don't know, but
yeah, like
also
the TPT horny polycule.
there tends to be a lot of drama going on because,
Yeah.
but I don't know, there's something kind of neat about that.
Yeah, I mean, I lived that life. I mean, that I was the T for T polycule, like, transbian lifestyle. Like, I did that. Like, and yeah, there's an appeal to it. One, because like, a lot of trans women have like a paraphilia for other trans women, and often this is why like a lot of the chasers end up being trans because like they use their fascination with trans women as like a mechanism to explore their own gender issues, and so like, and that's that's also very 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 common.
How do you feel about chasers?
I mean, I think that it's funny to me because like there's so many trans men out there who like demonize the chasers when ironically they're the literally the only ones who are interested in like having genuine
That's
like
everybody sane says that.
desire for them. It's like you're literally demonizing the only people who are willing to publicly date you and be with you without shame. Whereas like you're never going to have a regular straight guy be like into you. Like I think it's possible, but I think it's incredibly rare and like almost always the case that they have a paraphilia, a specific kink for trans women. And like the ones who can accept that and like relabel it not as chaser but as trans amorous or like or
Yeah.
a gamp or like gynoandromorphophilia or like whatever, like when you and accept that, I mean, like, but the problem is in order to accept that the only people who like you are people who have a specific kink for like feminized males is like you have to be okay with seeing yourself as essentially male. Whereas that violates the validation and the self-concept of like, needing the womanhood validated as like a construct, which is like tough for a lot of HPs because part of the neurosis is the self-conception that gets built up over time, the narrative identity of like I'm a I'm a woman, hear me roar.
Yeah, but that's so appealing. But also, it's so much to that. It's so much sociologically to that. That whole, there's so many issues. There's so uh There's so many issues. I don't like just like I find it very easy to just get side tangent into something completely unrelated, but yeah, it's just I was just thinking about the whole there's we have this whole social construct of women that it really isn't what women are. And I think it's so appealing to women and it's so appealing that men get sucked into. And then it's so horrifying that some men hate women. And also it's so horrifying that some women don't want to be women anymore.
Right. What are your thoughts on like the incel transmaxing pipeline into trans identification? Any interesting thoughts there, or do you think that's more or less the same phenomenon as AGP? It just
I
kind of
don't
like
I don't think that well, as far as if I think it's I don't it might be contextually sort of different in some ways, but I think it's inherently I would put it in the same category, but I think that it is not like if you are an incel, becoming trans means that you might be able to get into a T for T polycule. I
right.
don't think it's gonna actually make you be able to get with a lesbian very easily. You know, it's not likely. So
Yeah, but also, just I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about like wanting to be objectified. Is not just wanting to be like objectified, but just wanting to be desired at all. So I think
yeah,
so many men, particularly young men who don't have job prospects, career prospects, they don't fit in with the macho men. They don't they're they're not like meeting the criteria that society deems to be a successful male, masculine, good career, makes money, good with women, blah blah blah. Like you sort of like there's all these like standards to be like a like good man, or to be a successful man in that kind of like male masculine archetype. That I think it's just like, and the men who don't live up to that at all, like they just are
yeah,
invisible in society. And I think that invisibility and being disposable, because males are the disposable sex. It's
hmm
why if the ship is sinking, who is disposable? It's the men. The women and the children are the ones who go in the lifeboats. That's the social construct. So men are the disposable sex.
just
You
get good
know,
at judo and flip the
yeah.
woman over you.
So
When the lion's coming, you push the woman in front.
yeah. Well, this person said, I know plenty of male losers who don't desire to become women. It's not that simple. Yeah, I think it's not, but like you have to also have that underlying predisposition of autogynephilia, which is the inverted like attraction stuff. But then when you combine that with the failed male stuff, like I think it is causing more people to go down the trans pipeline than otherwise would. Whereas like before, like, it was a lot easier to be a successful man when you could just like graduate from high school, go to a factory, make a good paying job, and like be, get, have like success with women. Whereas like now it's like a lot harder, I think. And also like the pipelines are just so much more available. There's far less gatekeeping. It like used to be like the like gatekeeping was like they would not give you hormones unless they were confident that you could go like pretty deep stealth. Like, and like, so if you didn't already pass prior to hormones, like they wouldn't give you hormones. Whereas now it doesn't, you could be like 6'4", 250 pounds of pure muscle, like, thick beard shadow. And like, you can just walk down to the clinic and say, hey, give me that. And they'll give you hormones. So it doesn't matter.
And it won't give you the outcome that you so desire. Like it's a
Right.
lie. Um, yeah. So I just had like kind of an epiphany, like a rhetorical like epiphany. Um, so I think that with those guys, those incels, fail males, whatever. I hate framing it all like that. They have two options. I can change myself to become an alpha male, whatever, more masculine, make a bunch of money. Theoretically, maybe go to therapy and fix whatever is off-putting. Like that's what a lot of feminists will say. Or you can become trans and change yourself. Okay. But let's say that you aren't like fucked up and off-putting. Okay. Like you're not actually like, personally like just you're not actually immediately calling every woman a bitch immediately every single time you see them. And that's the real reason you're an incel. Let's just say it's like, it's just, you're so socially, you don't have money, you just don't fit the niche, and you don't know how to meet people the right way or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you can change yourself in all these different ways to try to get what you want. But I think that even if you transition, you're still going to find, after having transitioned, you're still going to find that no matter how much you change yourself, you're not, it's not just making people like you. Like you start taking the hormones, and it's like, oh, I took the hormones, now you have to like me. Like I have to get like, but you're actually still out of luck.
Right.
And the real solution is what the trans people end up discovering. And they discover it in a really sick and fucked up way, like for them, like they're in a bad situation, but they discover the thing is, no, it's not, I'm not the problem. Everyone else is the problem, and I need to act like I deserve to be treated right. And then you have trans people like, hey, you call me the right fucking pronouns, treat me right. Except they're treat me right for the thing that I've changed myself unfairly into. Like it's like a weird, like complicated mess at that point. But if you start with that attitude from the beginning, and you're like, hey, treat me right, I don't want to have to change my, like I deserve, like these incels, they just don't know, like it's a numbers game, and dating sucks, and most of the avenues for meeting people suck, and that's a big part of it. And you just need to put some time and effort in, like take care of yourself genuinely, and meet people, and it will work out. And yeah, I just think that you have to be more demanding, and feel like you deserve to be treated right. I deserve to be loved, and just believe it.
I do think that this is where it starts factoring in, what I perceive to be sort of the religious cultic aspect of the modern trans ideological movement, insofar as it, just like, the Scientology Thetan e-meter booth at the mall says like, hey, like, does your life suck? Do you want to turn your life around? Discover the truth, and, learn about yourself, and your life will, we'll solve all your problems. Like, we know what's wrong with you. And like, if you only learn this one thing about yourself, you'll discover your true authentic self. And it becomes this like religious pathway to like ultimate salvation, such that all your life problems are now contextualized in the framework of like, this is the thing that's wrong with you. Your thetan levels are off. This is the thing that's wrong with you. You have gender dysphoria. And like all of your life problems are now contextualized on the fact that like you have an actualized like inner identity, which is like very religious, spiritual language. It's basically new age cultism applied in the realm of like gender theory, such that we think that discovering your true gender is going to like solve all your problems. So it's like, yeah. And yeah, it's not like you said, it's like not a substitution for developing like a personality. And then you have these people, once they start down the medical pathway, or they have their awakening, and they come out to themselves like, oh, I'm trans, and transition is going to be the thing that solves all my life problems. Now you start doing the classic thing, which is very human to do, which is to delay your happiness until you achieve the next milestone. Oh, like, I'm not
Yeah,
going to
I
be
hate
I'm
that.
not going to be happy until I get this surgery. I'm not going to be happy until I get the revision surgery. Well, now I need another revision. Oh,
Be
well,
happy now. No, be happy now.
like, oh, now I need like facial feminization surgery. Now I need to do more vocal training. Now I need a trach shave. Now I need a breast augmentation. Now I need, a better haircut. Now I need to learn makeup. Now I need to pass more. If I only pass like 5% more, then I'd really be happy. So you just like, You develop like you delay your happiness and you externalize it. And this is just like Buddhism 101. You have to like or like Eastern philosophy 101. You have to learn to like just accept accept reality, or like Stoicism. You just have to accept the things you can't change. And like and yeah, and that like acceptance of reality is like going to deliver more contentedness in life than like any uh satisfaction of like some transition goal, really.
It helps when you have that one moment with a woman and she's like twiddling with your leg hair and you're like, holy shit. You know what I mean? It's like that helps a lot. Um,
Yeah. Well, I think like, it's like a lot of these, young men with like AGP, they have never experienced that. So like,
yeah.
like and then yeah, and then like the trans culture provides like, it provides community. It doesn't just provide community, it provides a sense of purpose because it is now a political thing. You get plugged into a fight for liberation, fight for revolution. It becomes a political struggle, and that political ideology provides a new sense of purpose, such that now you're not just a trans person; you're by default a trans activist. Your life is meaningful because you're fighting for trans rights. you know, um,
That's
and yeah, and so like I think that is like why we see so much activism within the trans community, is because like that's part and parcel of like why it's appealing, is because it plugs you into a liberation movement that provides meaning and purpose in your life.
mhm. Have you ever had the experience of listening to and hearing a song that you really love come up on a playlist and then thinking, I don't deserve to listen to this right now. It'll make me too happy. I love it too much.
No, I've never had that
I had that
happen.
happen for like 2 years straight. And it doesn't happen to me at all anymore, but that was the worst. That was the worst, that I literally would reject anything that made me happy at all.
Was that like a form of depression, or like was
No,
that just like,
it was like what you were saying. It was like, I'm gonna hold back my happiness until I achieve this.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, but this is just like the human condition. I mean, Alan Watts talked about this, decades ago, where it's like, we do for sure do this in like all of society. It's like, oh, I'll be happy when I graduate from high school. Or well, now I'll be happy when I graduate from college. Or now I'll be happy when I get a good job. Well, now I'll be happy when I, retire. Now I'd be happy. And then like you're like 60 years old and you wake up and like, oh shit. Like, I spent my whole life like trying to figure out how to be happy. And I kept delaying it. I was like, oh, I'll be happy when I get,
Yeah.
married. Or
That's so insidious about all the red pill sigma grind set thing, is like you make all the money and like it's like you need to forego all. They were literally like, they're all about foregoing yourself so to get this thing, and then it's like when you get there it's not gonna make you happy. Just
yeah, yeah.
just
O
get it.
On the flip side, though, as much as I agree with what you just said, I also think that having that sense of ambition and drive is actually deeply psychologically healthy, and that's one of the things that I think is like, preventing, satisfaction in some of these, young men, is like they just don't have anything to like live for. And I think you need to have something to live for, to so you kind of do need that ambition. I mean, I think like living in the moment and just being like day to day, kind of like your zen master who's just like living moment to moment. I think that's great. You need that as like a foundation in your life, but like you also need some sort of like ambition or motivation, or like a passion project, or like a singular idea that just like motivates
Yeah,
you.
okay, this is what it should be, okay? Dude, make this your cult, okay? All these young men and everything, you need to get mad, and you need to be like, "Hey, I'm not happy, and we deserve to be like these young men, like, be more like the women, the feminists, like, stand up for yourself, be like, "Hey, we don't like the way that we're treated in society. We feel like shit all the time. Stand up for yourself and don't change yourself, make society change." Like it's an activist movement, and I think it's the right one.
for like the
For
men to like
yeah, for
imitate the like
those
the feminist
fail
strategy.
males. Yeah,
Yeah.
those fail males, like really it's really the same position that the feminists are in, like, not exactly, but, um, they have a problem with there's nothing wrong with them, they're not failures. They're just people, and they
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're definitely starting to see this. I mean, you see like lots of these communities of like, men going their own way, and like, the red
Yeah.
pill community, like the red pill communities, these incel communities, and like, yeah, I think that is part of, and people find meaning and like
Yeah, but
that, and
those people, like, especially with the red pill and incel, they're all saying that we deserve to be like alpha men. But no, 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 that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying being quote unquote a pathetic loser or whatever. Fuck that. No, whatever it is that makes you a pathetic loser doesn't make you a pathetic loser. What you are is great, and you need the world to know it.
yeah, I just think it's hard to have that attitude
It is.
and be honest, unless you've actually accomplished things in life. Like, I think if you are just like spend all day playing Xbox, like, and smoking weed, like, I think it's gonna be hard to like convince yourself
Xbox and weed, baby.
that like you are living your best life. you know, like, I think like people can definitely get stuck in that pattern as like a habit,
Well, especially with the weed
but
involved. Yeah.
yeah, you get in these like habit cycles, and it just becomes, like you're on loop, or since you're stuck in a rut. But like, I think, trying to just flip the script and say, actually, it's a good thing that I'm addicted to weed and playing video games for 13 hours a day. Like, I think psychologically, like, I think that's going to be, yeah, this is actually a good comment. Needs to be a place in society for men who aren't super masculine. I definitely agree with that. I think
Yeah.
that is one of the things, like, but my problem with like the trans culture is like, ideally this like trans culture stuff is that community,
But you have
but
to hate being a man. You have to hate yourself.
they've like coupled it with like a rejection of like who they are. And so it's like, no, I can't just be like a feminine guy. I have to be a 100% valid woman who has this gender identity that is the exact same gender identity as like a female, and this gender identity that like metaphysically makes me who I am, and that's like identical to like female. So I'm like, really, I'm just the same as them. And like, if you don't acknowledge that, you're a terrible person, you're a bigot, and like,
And then the moment you have that moment where you're like, my leg hair protects me from poison ivy, and then you start feeling good about just what you are, like, for some whatever reason,
right,
they don't like that. They're like they'll get uncomfortable and upset with you. I've seen it for like I've experienced it in Boston, in the Boston
right,
queer community.
right. And the other one I think is like, I think this is hard for AGPs because of like dysphoria and like dysmorphia and like, sort of like the body perception stuff. But like learning to appreciate the like the fact that it's good to be strong. Like it is good to have the strength that being a testosterone creature entails. And just like being grateful that like you have that physical body, and like, like the gym, I think, can like help a lot of people. But it's like, but the problem is that like that muscularity is in conflict with the self-image of femininity, because we assume that like a muscular person is like incompatible with like femininity, but they just want to. And so it's like it's sort of like that. And I've experienced that like all my life, this like struggle between, like, on the one hand, I love lifting weights, I love being muscular, I love gym culture, I love that sort of like machismo associated with like gym culture, but it like conflicts with like my desires for feminization. So it's like I've always had this like tug of war in my mind of like, do I want to continue bulking up, or do I want to like try and like starve myself and like like just do cardio to like catalyze my muscles versus like building them up. And it's just, I've always been in this like struggle for like my entire life. So um
Yeah.
um well, I know we're at 2 hours, so I don't know. This has been a really good conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so.
So I don't know. I think we covered like a lot of the topics that I wanted to cover, and as well as some additional things. I didn't really have too many other things on my talking to list. I think we kind of had the exact conversation that I was hoping to have with you.
Cool.
So
Well, hopefully you won't. You'll completely get rid of Evo Psych or whatever, and
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna be still championing Eva Psych, but I'm also like a big culture person. Like going back to that like Chomsky grammar stuff. Like ironically, like when I was in grad school, I like hated Chomsky and I hated universal grammar, and I was really pushing for like his like opponents in that debate, the like constructivists. There's this guy Daniel Everett who worked with like these Amazonian tribes, and he thought that like this Amazonian tribe like violated Chomsky's assumption, because like the like universal grammar patterns were like different in this Amazonian tribe. So he thought like that's proof that like it's like constructed, or it's like a
Chomsky's right.
yeah.
Look, hold on. I agree. I agree with Chomsky though. So I'm not totally get rid of Evo Psych.
Yeah, that's funny, because like I think Chomsky is like wrong, but like I mean, there's an element of truth, but like I think the idea that it's like, yeah, I know that there's like an innate grammar module. I think that's a little simplistic. So in that sense, like I am like very much like the human brain is plastic. We're like enculturated creatures. Like, I mean, my like, favorite psychologist of all time is this guy Julian Jaynes, who argued that like consciousness itself is like a social construction. So I'm very like amenable to like social like constructivism. I just sort of like bothers me that people are like in denial of like any innate differences. It's not that they just like say that they're like not important. They just say they don't exist at all, which I've seen that. Like,
I need to
they call it like essentialism. Like, oh,
okay. I need to
you're a
distinguish myself.
bioessentialist.
I need to distinguish myself from that. Okay, it's for me. The thing about me is it's not that. The thing about me is anytime that you claim that you know what the innate natural truths of human is, I'm going to be skeptical, because I think that it's really hard to know for sure. And there's always, every time we think that we know that, 10 years later, we come up with a new test and we're like, oh, we found we've pulled off more meat from that theory every
Right.
time.
Well, we'll take this. Like I know, like in like Mooncat's video on like debunking evolutionary psychology, she was criticizing Eva Psych for changing its hypothesis in regards to some certain like innate thing. It was like, oh, like at first, like they were saying it's like a dual mating strategy, and now they're saying it's like this mate switching strategy. So therefore, it's not science, because they're just changing their assumptions in order to fit the new evidence. Well, that's how science works. So it's like, so all these claims about like, this module or this tendency or this trait's like innate, like like as good scientists, we should all bracket it with like a tentativeness and like humility, and just like, yeah, this is a tentative hypothesis. It's got some preliminary evidence to support it, but like it's very possible that like we'll learn something new in the future that will have to change the nature of the hypothesis. That's just like science. But somehow people think like Eva Psych is like different from any other
Well, it's
realm
because
of
of,
like
I guess it's because of the way that people talk about it, where they're so certain, and they're so certain of these things in a way that's so dismissive of like these new ideas, where you're talking about the system that we live in.
Right. Well, I
And
think it's because people piggyback on these ideas to sell courses, to be gurus, to be dating experts, to be life coaches, to like go on these talk shows and like give
to
men advice.
transition people.
Yeah, so it's like when you claim like special knowledge about the nature of humanity in order to like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, it's like very easy to get into guru status, and like we sort of like forget to be humble as like yeah, how complicated human beings are. But that's just like the internet, and influencer culture, and just people being dumb, and how it's like rare to, it's like, it's, you get way more clicks and engagement when you say like very like non-nuanced things on the
Okay,
internet.
what can we say right now that'd be the best? Wait. I've been seeing the name Chomsky pop up like a lot. Did he die?
I actually saw that someone like, oh, I think he might have asked. That's something going on. Oh, 1 day ago, MSN, Noam Chomsky isn't dead yet.
Oh, okay.
20 hours ago, Noam Chomsky's wife says report of famed linguist deaths are false. Oh my god. But he did suffer he suffered a massive stroke. Apparently he's 95 years old. Dang.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was that old. But yeah, that's kind of awkward that people are like, yeah, I saw people like saying like, oh yeah, let's remember the great linguist. He's like not dead yet. That's like,
yeah,
that's funny. So, okay, all right. Well, I think this was this is great. Thanks for coming on. Agreeing to do this.
yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for reaching out.
Yeah,
Talk to you soon.
totally. Okay, all right.
Bye.
See ya.